morning, everyone. Today is February the 16th. The time is now 10:02. Call to order to establish a quorum and the chairs and to begin the legislative committee meeting of the Contractors State License Board. My name is Miguel Galarza, and I'm the chair of that committee. I want to thank all the committee members and the public for attending today's video conference of the legislative committee meeting. Committee members, we will start our meeting with our cameras on, but if you experience bandwidth issues, I will ask you to turn off your cameras. And if you'd like to make a comment at the meeting, please turn your cameras on and select and raise your hand icon at the WebEx application. I will call on board members to speak, and when called upon, please unmute yourselves, and when finished, return to mute and turn off your camera. You'll also need to click on the raise hand button icon to lower your hand. Only board members who are members of the legislative committee may comment or participate in this meeting. Members of the public, if you're joining us on WebEx and you would like to make a comment at the appropriate time, either raise your hand or use the chat feature to send us a note that you'd like to make and offer public comment. If you join us on phone and would like to make a public comment during that public comment opportunity, please press *3 and raise your hand. You use the same system throughout the meeting for public comment during each agenda item. Joining us today are Registrar David Folk, Chief Deputy Registrar Michael Janoski, and Chief of Legislation Euphilia Lamar, CSLB staff, and Board Legal Counsel Christy Sledge. Rico Garcia is our host and moderator, and he will be assisting us by monitoring the phone teleconference line. Mariah Rivera is the Executive Office Analyst and will be calling roll. Thank you again, both Rico and Mariah. Mariah, would you be so kind to call roll and establish the quorum for us this morning?
Miguel Galarza.
Here.
David De La Torre.
Here.
Diana Love.
Here.
Stephen Panelli, approved absence. James Ruane.
Here.
Johnny Simpson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Mariah. Thank you, committee members. The next item on the agenda is public comment session for items not on the agenda and future agenda items requested. This item is provided for members of the public to request that an item be placed on future agendas and to comment on items not on today's agenda. To allow this committee enough time to conduct its full schedule of business, I will be limiting, for the most part, public comment to 3 minutes apiece. Please note that state law prohibits committee members from discussing any matter brought up during public comment. We're also not allowed to act on any item not on the agenda. If you want the committee to discuss a topic not on the agenda, you can ask for it to be considered to be placed on as an issue on the agenda for a future meeting. If you have an application, complaint, disciplinary charge pending before the board, we ask that you do not discuss the details of your case or pending complaint. Committee members are not permitted to receive evidence or other information that is not part of the administrative record in the case. If your comments are related to a specific agenda item, you can make your comments now. But if you ask that you wait until a specific item comes up for discussion, we will ask for public comment before acting on any item on the agenda today. So with that, are there any members of the public that would like to speak on an item that is not on the agenda? Rico, could you check?
There are currently no hands raised, no comments from the public.
Very good. Do any committee members have any agenda items or any items they would like to place on future meeting agendas? Hearing and seeing none, I will now move on to our next agenda item. Item C, which is review, discuss, and possible actions on legislative proposals regarding information and qualifying individuals must provide under Business and Professional Code, Section 7068.1. There are two proposals to amend the Business and Professional Code, Section 7068.1. An introduction is on page 26 of your packets, summarizing both proposals. Also, the proposal amendments show that the combined language for both proposals. The legislative proposal regarding what a qualifying individual must provide under the Business and Professional Code, Section 7068.1. The first proposal begins on page 27 of the packet, and the new chief of legislation, Ophelia Lamar, will summarize that proposal. If you don't mind, Ophelia.
Hi, good morning, committee members and Chair Galarza. I want to start by stating that this is a CSLB proposal. However, the version in the packet would clarify the definition of firm. This amendment was proposed to increase understanding of who is responsible to meet the requirements of Business and Professions Code, Section 7068.1. However, upon further review, we feel this amendment is not appropriate at this time. Registrar vote will speak to removing this amendment from the proposal.
David, your thoughts?
Okay, thank you, Fauna. Good morning, members of the committee and Chair Galarza. I'd like to just provide some information on how important 7068.1 is for consumer protection. And I think what you heard in the prior committee is that contractors or applicants for a license are required to at least they have to have 10% equity in the entity if it's a second license, or they have to post a qualifiers bond. Now, if they're going to have additional licenses, they're going to need to post a 20%. They have to have 20% equity if they're going to avoid posting that qualifiers bond on subsequent licenses. So the issue for us, though, is when we want these applications to be clean, they have to be filled out appropriately. And we do find with our enforcement division, on occasion, that applicants are falsely stating they have 20% so they can qualify additional licenses and also to avoid the bond. If that's found to be false, that's a violation of 7112 of the Business and Professions Code. That's grounds for revocation of the license. Now, there's a term in 7068.1, that term is firm, and firm is used by our staff here to determine how many additional licenses somebody can be on. And we have internally, we've defined what that means, and I think at some point it needs to be put into the statute itself. But at this time, we need to research this further. We need to look at how this would impact the industry. So from a staff perspective, removing the duty statement requirement makes sense because we have the authority to require applicants to provide specified information. We do review every application, and we can include information or instructions in an application as to what needs to be submitted. So we have that authority now. We really don't need the duty statement, but it's not, at this point, we're not comfortable with putting in a statute a definition for the word firm until we've talked to consumer groups and stakeholders and law firms that may impact the ability for someone to be on additional licenses. We want to make sure that makes sense. And if we're going to eliminate the 20% equity requirement and require a bond in its place, we have to make sure that that's done appropriately. At what point could you avoid having that qualifier bond? Is it going to be because you have a majority of same officers on additional licenses? That's the kind of thing we need to look at. We need to take a very thoughtful approach here and make sure whatever decision is made, it doesn't impact consumer protection. So thank you, Chair Galarza.
Thank you, David, Registrar David. To me, I clearly understand the proposal, and the amendment does not seem appropriate right now to be removed, and clearly requires more research. And for that reason, I also recommend the motion to remove the duty statement provision from this time, and staff will circle back. I recommend that the motion, including to removal of the duty statement from the provision at this time, but also for staff to circle back on this firm issue. Are there any comments from our members?
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, thank you, Rico. Rico, could you check to see if there are any public comments on this item?
No public comment.
Thank you, Rico. Is there a motion to recommend to the full board that CSLB pursue a legislative proposal to remove the duty statement requirement in subdivision D?
I make the motion as stated.
Thank you, and that is Ms. Love?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Love. Do I have a second?
Second,
And that Mr. De La Torre?
yes.
Thank you, sir. Mariah, would you be so kind as to take the roll?
Sorry, I'm sorry. We need to take public comment after the motion has been made. This is Christy Shields, counsel for the board.
My
So I would
apologies.
suggest you take public comment before you take roll.
And board comment as well?
Yes.
Oh, we've got a hand raised from Johnny Simpson. Go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah, I have a question is, are we talking about, I'm not sure I understand the motion. Are we, we're not passing this, we're just, the motion is to take this back to staff for further review, or is that, help me understand this motion.
No worries, Johnny. So it's twofold. One is we're recommending to remove the duty statement provision, number one, and bringing that to the full board and shelving for this time until further discussion, the issue regarding the firm, and letting staff have a further review on the definition of firm. So our motion would be to forward this to the full board. Simply just to remove the duty statement requirement in subsection D. As the issue regarding the firm is not part of, will not be considered at this time. Did I confuse you more, Johnny, or did I clarify it?
Well, I'm concerned about the other piece of this with the $25,000 surety bond and all of that. Don't these two tie together?
Yeah, if I could comment on that, Chair Galarza, State Vote. Well, really, I think the motion here is for the committee to recommend to the full board to remove the duty statement requirement, and maybe it'd be a second motion to send the definition of firm and the consideration of eliminating the 20% equity requirement back to staff to perform more research and bring it back to the committee at a later time.
And that would make sense to me to do it that way.
Thank you, Johnny. Any other board members need additional clarification before I ask for public comment?
So let me just make sure I'm understanding. One, this is Diana Love. The motion is one of the motions is to remove the duty statement. The other is to review the word firm and to recommend to bring this matter to the full board. And then we're talking about the removal of the 20% to replace with a surety bond. Is that correct?
David? Our chief, Philia?
No,
Dave, you're muted, Dave.
The staff recommendation at this time is for the committee to consider making a motion to recommend the full board consider removing the duty statement requirement. And we would be able to move forward, we think, with legislation this session to perhaps put that into what they call an omnibus bill. So we'd be able to remove that requirement that's in the law, so we don't have to require a duty statement. Now, I think it's, to me, and Christy might want to weigh in, it's a second motion regarding the definition of firm and to remove the 20% equity requirement in lieu of posting a bond. Because for those two issues, the staff recommendation is that you send that back to staff to perform additional research. And you could either bring that back to this committee or to the full board. You know, my thought though is we bring it back to this committee after we've had meetings and we've vetted this further. So it's a more well-rounded proposal, if you will.
Okay. I
Yeah.
think
To
I
my
got it.
understanding, Ms. Love, that would be our second motion. Right now, the motion, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Folk, is that this motion is to remove the duty statement from
Right.
subsection D.
Recommend to the full board to remove the duty statement.
Yes.
Okay, second motion is to remove the word firm and to review the word firm and to remove the 20%.
That would be the
Second
upcoming,
motion.
yeah, the upcoming discussion and motion.
Okay.
Yes.
Then I'll make a motion after we open it up to the people on the phone.
Very good. Mariah, excuse me, Rico, could you check for public comment on this issue?
All right, is Mr. Chair Galarza, would you mind if I make just a brief comment on the issue for the board committee's clarification?
Certainly.
Okay, great, thank you. So the reason I would recommend that, one of the reasons we've talked about, the second part of the current motion that's pending is to refer the issue of firm, the 20% issue, and the bond potentially issue for further research, and is to explore why the 20% requirement was put into law, how staff have historically handled investigating and enforcing those provisions, what our options are, and to further explore whether it's a good for public protection to remove that requirement and require a bond in lieu or in addition to. I mean, these all things I think that in reviewing this with staff, I don't think there's been enough research done on this item. So I think before we're prepared to bring it back to the full board, we really need to have those answers for you so we can address any questions that the public might have or the legislature might have as to why we're potentially eliminating or adding these requirements. So if you have any further questions for me, that's great. But just from a procedural perspective, the Open Meeting Act requires us to take public comment before you act on any pending motion. So you always need to take public comment before you take roll. And I also recommend board comment as well before you take roll on any items so that the public has a chance to comment on the policy direction that's being recommended.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
that clarification.
Can I clarify something? The bond proposal is going to be presented next. The language as it's presented in the packet shows all three amendments as if they were all to be taken. So it has the duty statement removal. It also has the definition of firm that we have since had second thoughts about. And then the next presentation is going to be about the bond. So this vote would not be about the bond at all. It would only be about the duty statement. I
Right,
saw Christine's hand
apologies,
go up.
Fauna. I think I heard Ms. Love say bond, and so I said it, but I think you're correct. The pending motion only involves the firm and the 20% issue.
Right,
Apologies.
that's why I'm clarifying for the room.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, I would entertain any additional board member comments on this specific motion.
No other hands are raised.
Thank you, Rico. At this time, are there any public comments?
No public comment.
Thank you, Rico. With that, Mariah, would you please be so kind as to take roll?
So before we do that, let me just make a comment to make sure this motion is only on recommendation for the full board to remove the duty statement.
The duty statement and to shelf, and correct me if I'm wrong, to shelf the removal of the definition of firm until a later date.
You are correct, Chair Galarza.
Okay, I'll make that motion.
Okay, so we have Love. Love made the original motion and Mr. De La Torre made the second. Mariah, would you please be so kind as to call roll?
Miguel Galarza,
Yes.
David De La Torre,
Aye.
Diana Love,
Yes.
Steve Panelli, approved absence, James Ruane,
Aye.
Johnny Simpson.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Mariah. Moving on to the next proposal for this agenda item. This second proposal is to amend again professional and business code section 7068.1, which is on page 30 of your packet. That one specifically addresses the legislative proposal that would expand qualifier bond requirements pursuant to the Business and Professional Code section 7068.1. This is an industrial proposal that we've discussed in the licensing committee meeting earlier today, which would amend Business and Professional Code section 7068.1, subdivision A and B, as well as sections 7071.9 and 7071.10. This proposal would require a bond of qualifying individual for each license when that same person qualifies for multiple licenses, excluding a sole proprietorship. This proposal would also remove the percentage of ownership provisions related to obtaining multiple licenses and securing a bond of qualifying individual. Phil Vermeulen from the Contracting License Center will present on this specific proposal. Phil, are you available to speak?
Morning.
Good morning, sir.
As I discussed earlier today, the full board voted back in March of 2018 to remove the 20% requirement, but nothing ever came of it after that fact. Licensing contractors for the last 43 years, I'm very familiar with this area. And as everyone knows, the priority of the contractors board is the consumer. And under the current requirements of the 20%, I can tell you what contractors do is they hold their nose, write 20% down, and vice president, the Secretary of State does not require vice presidents to be shown on a corporation. Or on an LLC, you can put vice president and have members and managers, but it's meaningless because the board does not have the staff nor the capabilities to verify that information except for what shows up on the Secretary of State's website. There is absolutely no consumer protection. Fod mentioned earlier that I believe since the beginning of this year, there has been 76 actions, of which 59 entailed contractors who turned out did not have the 20%. I may have misspoken about that, Fod. If you want to correct me on that, that's fine, please. But my concern is that there is absolutely no consumer protection right now. And if we require the 20%, remove the 20%, excuse me, and instead require a $25,000 bond, which will cost approximately on the average about $200 a year, it's a heck of a lot more consumer protection than what we're getting now. As you know, this year or last year, this year, excuse me, on January 1st, the contractor licensing bond went from $15,000 to $25,000. That was based on a study the board had done that showed that the average home improvement project is now over $50,000. So they recommended either a $25,000 or $50,000 bond in the report to the legislature, and it was decided that $25,000 would be more appropriate to start with. And obviously, the $10,000 additional provides just that much more protection for the consumer. This is just one more step towards helping ensure that consumers come out of situations as whole as possible. So that's the logic behind this. It makes infinite sense. The cost, again, is minimal, but the protection obviously is much greater. So that's my 2 cents worth on this.
Thank you, Phil. CSLB staff requests that the legislative committee direct staff to perform additional research to determine the consumer protection value that a bond would provide. So with that, I would open it up to committee members if they have comments or questions regarding this specific action.
This is Diana. I have a question about why, if the board already removed the 20% back in March 2018, why do we need to remove it again? Or are we just including to replace it with the surety bond in lieu of?
David?
Yeah, it's my understanding, the board did approve that, but we could not find a legislator to take the bill. So the 20% was not removed. And I would just kind of restate what I said earlier. The concern from a staff perspective is that when you read 7068.1, there's various sections that talk about the 20% as it relates to a subsidiary or what it allows you to do in qualifying additional licenses. You know, that's where we have a concern. It just, if it could be ideally, it would be made very clean that perhaps a bond is not required when the majority of officers are the same, but it would be required in other situations. And that's not the way it reads today. But currently there is a 20% equity requirement if you're going to be qualifying additional licenses in most cases.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Love. Any other comments from our members?
Johnny, go ahead.
Please, Johnny.
Yeah, this is Johnny. It would seem to me that until we actually, I mean, I'm in favor of of having bonds and higher bonds. I mean, that's money you can get if you're a consumer. But at the same time, if we remove the 20% and the legislature does not approve the bond, then we really have nothing. So I believe this needs a little more work, and I would like to have a motion to, can I make a motion at this time?
Maybe have the public comment.
Okay. Okay.
Actually, yeah, I would recommend making the motion before public comment. Otherwise, when he makes a motion, we'll have to go out for public comment again, unless that's what you prefer. You could do it twice.
I'm perfectly, I would like to make a motion to send this back to staff for further review and to bring back to the committee after that review and correction.
So is there a second to Mr. Simpson's motion?
Second.
David Torre is noted as second. Public comment on this item.
Yes, Phil, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification for Johnny, just like when the board acted back in March of 2018, it was a vote of the board that required legislation from there that was never accomplished. With this argument, with your concerns, there is no concern, because unless the legislature makes the change, the status quo remains. So in other words, a bill has to be approved and signed by the governor in order for the 20% to be removed. So just to clarify that, Johnny.
With that comment, Mr. Simpson, does that alleviate your motion, or would you like to still move forward with your motion?
No, I'd like to leave my motion as is, to send it back to the committee, to the staff for further review and recommendation to the committee.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Mr. Delatorre. Christie, after Mr. Delatorre. Christie. Are you continuing with your second of the motion, Mr. Delatorre?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Christy, please.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I just want to clarify for my edification. I think what board member Simpson was simply trying to explain was that there's a policy decision that the board needs to make in terms of seeking legislation, and his concern, he can correct me if I'm wrong, is that if we pursue legislation to remove the 20% without any other option, or even our recommendation that they be connected to a bond, if any, that there is a problem from a consumer protection perspective. So I think that just clarify for the record that I think the staff will be researching options for doing one or the other or both, or even recommending other things for the board to consider to address this problem. So is that correct, Mr. Simpson?
That's exactly what I was trying to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that summary, Ms. Sledge. With that clarification and so forth, is there public comment on this item?
Yes, Richard Markison, you can unmute yourself and speak.
Richard Markison, it seems to me, and I believe the registrar suggested that this legislation be pursued in two different vehicles, but it's conceivable that you could put both provisions in a single bill, which would alleviate, I believe, Mr. Simpson's concern that eliminating the 20% without the bond increase somehow interferes with protecting the public. If they're both in the single measure, they either both go into effect or neither. And I'm sure that the ledge chair or staff or Mr. Fote, Registrar Fote, can probably poke a hole in my suggestion. But anyway, that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Rico, any further comments from the public?
No further public comment. I see a hand raised from Dave.
Feel free, David.
Yeah, thank you, Richard Marks. No, I'm not going to poke a hole in his suggestion. I just want to clarify what I had said earlier, though, and that is that the removal of the duty statement requirement, we might be able to get that into an omnibus bill. It'd be a department bill that because it would hopefully not be controversial. I don't know about the bond and the definition of firm. I would agree with Richard Markison that those two, as far as removing the 20% requirement, requiring a bond, and the definition of firm could be in one bill. So that's just some clarification.
Thank you, David. Having a first and a second, and having heard public comment and committee comment, Mariah, would you be so kind as to move forward with the roll?
Miguel Galarza,
Aye.
David De La Torre,
Aye.
Diana Love,
Aye.
Stephen Panelli, approved absence, James Ruane.
Aye.
Johnny Simpson,
Aye.
motion passes.
Thank you, Mariah. With that, I'm going to move on to agenda item D. D is to review and discuss some possible action on disaster response partnership with the Office of Senator McGuire. Senator McGuire has shown interest in CSLB's disaster response after wildfires recently impacted his district and, of course, most of California. A summary of the CSLB's potential partnership with Senator McGuire is located on page 36 of our packet, which includes an updated disaster response plan and two legislative proposals. These are meant to enhance CSLB's efficiency and coordinate responses after disaster and protect consumers who are victims of disasters. Agenda item D1 is to use CSLB's disaster response modernization plan, which begins on page 37. That revised plan is to collaborate with CSLB, Public Affairs Office, and Enforcement Division, and reflects CSLB's increased focus on enforcement in disaster areas and emphasizes the role of each of CSLB's division in coordinating disaster response. Additionally, on page 47, you'll see that the guidelines CSLB uses to prioritize complaints. Among the highest priorities are those that include elements of predatory criminal acts and significant public interest. Based on that criteria, violations in declared disaster areas typically fall into the highest priority and are treated as urgent. So given those considerations, members, do you have comments or questions regarding the revised disaster response plan?
There are no hands raised.
Thank you, Rico. Rico, are there any public comments at this time?
No public comment.
Thank you. The next agenda item is agenda item D2, which includes two CSLB proposals. The first one is a legislative proposal requiring the performance and payment bonds to perform residential construction following a declared state of emergency. The first proposal begins in your packet on page 46. This proposal would require the prime contractor to secure a separate performance and payment bonds in the amount of half the contract price for any home improvement contract after a disaster. Philia, will you discuss the proposed amendments for us?
Hi, thank you, Chair Galarza. The increase in number of and the value of complaints represents an increasing need to address financial damages caused by predatory contractors. So the first proposal would give consumers a guarantee against loss or damage when a contractor fails to comply with the contractor state license law. This proposal would be limited to areas for which the governor declares a state of emergency. CSLB staff requests the legislative committee to recommend to the full board to approve sharing this proposal with the office of the Honorable Senator McGuire. This recommendation is made with the understanding that staff will further confer with the chair of the legislative committee to seek authorization to take a position on any subsequent bill, and we'll notify the board of such action at the March quarterly meeting pursuant to page 16 of the board's procedural manual. Thank you, Chair Chair Galarza.
Thank you, thank you. With that, do any of our committee members have comments or questions on Philia's comments?
No hands are raised.
Thank you, Rico. Rico, are there any public comments at this time?
No public comment.
Thank you so much. So with that, I'm going to ask for a motion, or is there a motion to recommend to the full board to approve sharing this proposal with the office of the Honorable Senator McGuire?
It's Johnny, I would make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Is there a second?
Second, Jim Ruane.
Thank you, Mr. Ruane. Given a first and a second, do we have public comment on this item?
No public comment.
Thank you, Rico. With that, Mariah, would you be so kind as to call roll?
Miguel Galarza,
Aye.
David De La Torre,
Aye.
Diana Love,
Aye.
Stephen Panelli, approved absence, James Ruane,
Aye.
Johnny Simpson,
Aye.
motion passes.
Thank you, committee members. The second proposal would be to address the need for an increased consumer protection in disaster areas. This can be found in your packet on page 49 of your booklet. And it is specifically for the legislative proposal to increase the statute of limitations for fraudulent license use. This proposal would increase the statute of limitations for a misdemeanor violation when a licensee allows unlawful use of their license. This proposal is supported by consumer complaints received in designated disaster areas where licensed contractors allow unlicensed contractors to use their license for disaster rebuild. Philia, would you present this proposed amendment?
Thank you, Chair Galarza. CSLB derives its authority to seek misdemeanor charges for fraudulent use of a license from Business and Professions Code Section 119. This section applies to all boards and bureaus within the Department of Consumer Affairs and classifies fraudulent use of a license, including using a fictitious license, lending a license to another person, or allowing unlawful use of a license as a misdemeanor. So this proposal would add Business and Professions Code Section 119 to the list of misdemeanors in the penal code that have a statute of limitation of 3 years after discovery of the commission of the offense. The current statute of limitations for violations of Section 119 is currently 1 year from the date of violation. So disaster recovery often takes years, so this limitation prevents CSLB from taking appropriate action against a licensee who allows fraudulent use of their license. Setting a 3-year statute of limitations would allow CSLB to investigate and pursue criminal offenses against contractors who permit their license to be used by an unlicensed contractor in a declared disaster area. CSLB staff requests the legislative committee to recommend to the full board to authorize staff to share this proposal as well with the office of the Honorable Senator McGuire. Again, this request is made with the understanding that staff will further confer with the chair of the legislative committee to seek authorization to take a position on any subsequent bill and notify the board of such action at the March quarterly meeting pursuant to page 16 of the board's procedure manual. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Committee members, do you have any questions or comments regarding this recommendation?
There are no hands raised.
Rico, are there any public comments on this issue?
No public comment.
Thank you. At this time, I would entertain a motion to recommend to the full board to authorize staff to share this proposal with the office of the Honorable Senator McGuire. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Delatorre, so noted.
Second, Jim Ruane.
Jim Ruane, noted as a second. Is there public comment on this item, on this motion?
I have a request to amend the motion. This is Christy Shields, legal counsel for the board. I think staff also asked for authority to confer with the chair of the legislative committee to seek authorization to take a position on any subsequent bill and notify the board of such action at the March quarterly meeting pursuant to page 16 of the board's procedural manual. So was that intended to be a part of the motion or not? I just need clarification on that.
David, would you be so kind as to chime in?
I would not object to include that in the motion. Yes.
Thank you.
Seconder agrees.
And Jim Ruane, you're comfortable with that? Yes?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
With that, is there public comment? Does that satisfy your concern, Ms. Slage?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome. Public comment, please, Rico.
No public comment.
Thank you. Mariah, would you be so kind as to call roll?
Miguel Galarza,
Aye.
David De La Torre,
Aye.
Diana Love,
Aye.
Stephen Panelli approved absence, Jim Ruane,
Aye.
Johnny Simpson,
Aye.
motion passes.
Thank you, Mariah. The next agenda item is item E, which is the review and discussion and possible action regarding the restitution fund at the Contractors License Board. This material for this agenda can be found on E1, which is on page 54 of your booklet. Effective July 2021, CSLB was given a one-time appropriation to administer the Solar Energy System Restitution Program. This program begins with restitution to customers who experienced the financial loss after agreeing to install a solar energy system on their residence. To date, CSLB has issued $2.7 million in restitution to customers who were financially harmed by solar contractors under this program. While claims continue to be submitted, this one-time appropriation is projected to be expended by claims already received and yet to be processed. Additionally, the Enforcement Division reports solar complaints are trending upward with a 103% increase in solar energy system complaints received when compared to 2018 to 2022. Due to the rapid expenditure of the restitution fund, increased volume of consumer complaints and restitution claims, as well as an increase in the value of the complaints, CSLB staff has concluded that the solar energy system restitution program needs continued funding. On page 54, there are three possible means of continuing funding for the solar restitution fund. Specifically, one, legislation to the new PACE restitution fund, which will be discussed in the next item. Or two, a fee is assessed on the licensee when force cases are settled by CSLB. Or three, a fee assessed to connect to the grid. I will now invite David Folk and any other comments on this item. Dave?
Thank you, Chair Galarza. Just further on some of the comments Chair Galarza made about the increase in solar complaints. We're currently receiving the last few months over 230 consumer filed complaints a month, and that's far too many. And you can see where, if you look at what we were receiving in 2018, what we received in 2022, it's a 101% increase. So, we still have some challenges ahead of us. There's going to be a statewide supervisor meeting this afternoon at 1 o'clock. And one thing we're going to be talking about at that meeting is just, how we can use the tools that we have, how we can use the enforcement tools we have to change this marketplace where consumers are happy with their solar contracting experience. And I think that the majority of them are, but unfortunately, there's some contractors that pose a serious threat, and that they're using what we call green funding. And that's where the funding or the loan company pays the contractor directly. And that's been a real contributor to the complaints that we're receiving. And it's also contributed to the depletion of our recovery fund. So where we're at right now is we did stop taking new claims at the end of the 2022 calendar year. And we did that because we had one contractor that's now received over 100 complaints or claims. And that's estimated to deplete the remaining fund balance. So we think we do need a continuation of the recovery fund. How much? We've just thrown out a number of, say, $2 million would be very helpful right now. And not quite sure how that could be achieved. And that's something you're going to hear about from the next presenter. She does have some ideas of how we may be able to do that. But the next presenter is going to talk about the financing the funding as it relates to property assessed clean energy, or PACE funding. And so Tuesday of this week, 8 of us got together and we reviewed, I think it was 413 files, 413 solar claims. We reviewed those files to see how they were funded. Were they personal checks? Were they bank loans? Were they PACE funding? And we found that, interestingly enough, 44% of those that were reviewed involved PACE funding. And the total amount of the PACE loans was $2,825,000, so quite significant. So PACE loans are a problem, have been a problem, in that they pay the contractor directly. Now, some of us, the staff that are on this, participating in this meeting today, did have a meeting with an association or a group that oversees PACE administrators, and they really emphasized that, I think it was in 2019, when the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation began to have authority over PACE administrators, the industry cleaned up. And we did see that. So we really did see where we have a reduction in PACE-related claims. However, there's a lot of legacy issues that exist. And so I'm just, letting the committee know that I think staff have done a tremendous job in reviewing these claims, making payouts. There's claims that have been received after January 1st of 2023 that are just on file. They're not being processed because we don't have the funds remaining. So it's something that, we're asking the committee to consider is supporting, if possible, a continuation of this fund until we can get our consumer complaints down to a more manageable level. When I say manageable level, if we were getting around 70 to 80 complaints a month, that's manageable. That we can understand if they're mainly workmanship related. But we're getting 230 or more a month, and many of them are alleging fraudulent activity or even failure to perform the work. That's very troubling. So again, the fund's been very helpful to consumers, and we're just wanting to bring this to the committee's attention and see if we would have your support, if we could find a equitable way to fund it, to continue to have a fund in the future until this marketplace stabilizes. Thank you, Chair Galarza.
Thank you, David. I know Maria is going to speak. Maria, if you'd be so kind as to wait until public comment, I will give you the appropriate time you need to discuss your issue. Thank you. CSLB staff requests that the legislative committee to recommend to the full board to consider alternative means of funding to continue the solar energy system restitution program. So with that, I would like to ask for committee member comments or questions on this item.
There are no hands raised.
Thank you. Rico, I believe there should be a Maria on the line.
Is Maria Parra, is that the last name?
Is her?
Yes, Maria Parra.
Yes.
That's correct.
Maria, I've sent a request to unmute you.